Hey everybody, my name is Jim Farmer. I'm the festival director of Out on Film, Atlanta's LGBTQ film festival. This is our 36th year and we have an amazing lineup. One of the documentaries that we're showcasing this year is called A Cooler Climate. I'm going to read a brief introduction and then I'm going to introduce one of the co-directors. In the deeply personal new documentary, A Cooler Climate, from James Ivory and Giles Gardner, the Oscar-winning filmmaker uncovers boxes of films he shot during a life-changing trip to Afghanistan in 1960. This glorious color footage unleashes a Proustian reverie during which Ivory recounts his life as traveler, outcast, and artist. Please welcome the co-director, Giles Gardner.
Hello. Very
Thanks so
pleased to
much
be
for talking to me tonight. I really like this. My programmers love this film, so I'm really happy this
here.
program.
We're super happy that it's in your festival and your
That's great.
program. Thank you.
Well, how did this project come up for you?
Well, it was a sort of accident. I've known Jim for many years. I've worked on a lot of films with Merchant Ivory,
Mm-hmm.
and whenever I'm in the States, I live in Europe, but
Yeah.
whenever I'm in the States, we get together and it was on one of these occasions that we were having lunch and he was asking me what I was working on. I'm an editor, is my sort of day job, and I've been working on planning an edit of a project about Afghanistan, which turned out never to happen. Anyway, he said during this lunch that he had some footage that he'd shot of Afghanistan, and if I was interested, maybe I could use a few shots from it, and so I, of course, was fascinated. I didn't know he'd been to Afghanistan, and he basically he was heading back down to the city, and we were in upstate New York, and he handed me the keys to his house, a house that I know very well from working on the Merchant Ivory films in the past. And I went over there and hunted in the closet where he had told me to look, and there was this box at the back of a closet with Afghanistan written on it. He knew exactly where it was. I pulled it out, and it had, I think, 12 cans of 16 millimeter that was
Oh
sort
wow.
of rusty with the labels falling off. And of course, it took my breath away. I was like, wow, there's a real treasure here. And I brought it back to Paris with me with Jim's blessing to do whatever I liked with it. And so it sort of began like that. I had a 16 millimeter projector in Paris, and I basically just started by projecting it onto the wall at home, and saw this remarkable footage.
Mm-hmm.
And this was probably around the time that America was pulling out of Afghanistan, so we had all this kind of craziness going on, and on the news every night, Afghanistan it was just like a hell, and here was footage of an entirely different place, a sort of magical, wonderful, pure, different kind of time, a golden time, I guess.
Mm-hmm. How long did it take you to go through all of this?
You mean the whole process
I mean,
of
like,
building?
like all these boxes. How long did it take you to go through all this and process and see what all was there?
Yeah, quite a while, because I was doing it, I was working a lot at the time, and so it was sort of a bit of a hobby at first. It was sort of watching things, um, trying to get my head around what was there, calling Jim up and asking him what it was I was looking at, um, and we came across. I suppose I started assembling. I'm an editor, so I started looking at it in
Yeah.
terms of scenes and started gradually, bit by bit, building the scenes, and calling Jim to ask him what was this thing. And I saw one thing that I could identify, because there weren't any big monumental buildings or any obvious locations, but one thing that really stood out was this tomb in a cemetery, a marble tomb. And I asked him what that was, and he said it was Babur's tomb.
Mm-hmm.
And that led to me going and buying the Baburnama, which is the journal of Babur. Babur being this emperor who had conquered Afghanistan in the 16th century and made it his home, and he went on later to conquer India and
Yeah,
establish the Mughal Empire. But Kabul was his first sort of kingdom as part of his conquering rampage and
okay.
pillaging across the world. And he fell in love with it. And so I started reading that book, and that became the sort of catalyst to thinking, okay, maybe some sort of story that we can
Exactly.
start to tell here with this footage.
I was
Um,
reading a description that really kind of spoke to me.
yeah.
Um, this is such, it's talking about obviously, uncovering these boxes. This is such a multi-layered journey, journeys we all take around the globe and within our own interior landscapes. I guess my question is, how would you say that uncovering these boxes, affected, um, you know, Jim personally and professionally?
Well, I mean, he'd been through, it was quite a pause he'd had. He hadn't shot a film for quite a long time, and I knew he was sort of interested in. When I first mooted the idea of actually making a film with this, that there was quite a lot of material there. I think he got quite enthused by the idea that he's someone who's lived his life making films, and
Exactly.
re-engaging with the project was I think very exciting. And so it was nice and very open and very enthusiastic, the kind of the beginnings of it. Um, at first there was a kind of reluctance on his part, I'd say, to go the way that I was interested in taking the film, because I think from the Babur, reading about Babur and this journal that Babur wrote it's a very intimate journal. It's a very intimate story about his life and about growing up as a young emperor. And he recounts the most extraordinary personal things.
Hmm.
And it started making me think a lot more about who Ivory was when he
Sure.
made his journey to Afghanistan. And it was the last film he'd made, or the last film he'd shot before before meeting Ismail Merchant and starting to do the feature film career that we all know him for. And so I thought, well, this is timely. It's really interesting. He's sort of at the end of his career. His career has waned, and it's an opportunity to go back and look at who he was before he got swept along on this incredible career, sort of
Okay.
non-stop filmmaking. So
Exactly.
this was the kind of idea I had. And at first, I think Jim was a little reluctant to do that. He was more interested in Afghanistan and not so interested in talking about himself. Um,
Okay.
but little by little, we came to it through different means.
So when you two first said, let's do that, I mean, how long did it take before it was actually finished and ready to get out to the world?
Oh, it took some time because I'm in Paris and he's in New York.
Yeah.
We had our first get together with the material in Paris in 2020. Jim was invited by the Cinémathèque Française to do a retrospective of his film, so he
Sure.
was in town, and and at that point I'd still just watched the material. I hadn't done. I'd done some assemblies of ideas of scenes, but not more than that. And so I planned to have Jim for a couple of days just to look at the material and for us to talk together and discuss different ideas. I'd read the Babanama. So he what it was kind of strange. It was again around a meal, like the beginning of the film. We had breakfast together, and while we were having breakfast, he produced these letters that he'd written whilst he was in Afghanistan to his mother and his father. And so I was looking at these letters and thinking, okay, this is really nice stuff. And this could be really going in the direction of kind of opening up the sort of more biographical side of who James was at that time. And so halfway through eating our boiled eggs, I said, I'm going to go and I'm going to come back later, but I want to film you reading these letters, if that's okay.
Exactly.
So he went back to the apartment, and I went off and I went and rented a camera, and rented a tripod and sound gear and everything. I, didn't have any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I was back by 2 o'clock in the afternoon with all this stuff, and had brought a lot of props from home, bits of 16mm gear and things like this that I had in the house, and laid it all out in this apartment on this big table. Jim sitting there, and he reads the letters, and I'm filming him. And this was really the beginning of it. It started like that. From that, I was able to edit a short sort of 15-minute example of what I imagined the film could be, which would
Mhm.
be Jim reading, looking, thinking about Afghanistan, cutting to the footage of Afghanistan, and then some excerpts from Babur. So all the three sort of primary elements of what would become the film were installed in that sort of time. The problem was is that then COVID hit, and like for every project at the time, it just stopped everything. It did, however, it did give me more personal time because the
Yeah.
professional work shut down, and so I got really more deeply into the editing. Jim, he saw the 15-minute thing. I sent him a quick time of it, and he loved it straight away.
Nice.
He really enjoyed it, and thought that it was like opening a treasure chest and stepping back in time. And I think at that point, everything somehow a project was born, and so during the COVID period, it accelerated, and I got a long way through a lot of the putting together of the film,
Yeah.
choosing the extracts and all this sort of stuff in that time.
It's such a
Um,
it's such a beautiful film. Congratulations. It really is. Um,
yeah,
can you talk a little bit about Jim come to terms with his own sexual identity and that process for him?
Well, I mean, the more we talked and the more we looked back, once we got talking about his past and his
Yeah.
family life and things like this, the more I asked questions. Um, it was what seemed really interesting to me is that I was very curious about this, thinking what was it like in 1950s, 40s and 50s in Oregon, growing up as a young gay man. It must have been tough. He was in the countryside, and quite kind of farming country and logging country. You're in a world where masculinity is a very defined and not fitting into that box is, I just thought that must have been quite tough. What was really fascinating was Jim's reflections on that
Mhm.
from a very young age, he recognized that he was different, and he sort of saw it as I think as a sort of form of self-esteem, something that made him special. And I thought straight away, I just thought this is really somehow the key to the project.
Yeah.
That something about how, and I thought it was something that we would find very interesting today. Young people,
Okay.
especially today, would find really interesting. That you can, you know, as you're forging your way through life, you can decide to be different, and you can embrace it, and you can own it, and it's I think somehow beautiful lesson for all of us in life. And Jim lived it, and in a really all embracing kind of way.
Yeah. I know that the film has been doing festivals this year, and I think into last year's. Can you tell me a little bit more about the future, or what's next for this documentary, and what's your next project? What are you working on next?
Well, I'm for this documentary, we've done about 14 festivals now. We've still got
Oh,
some more coming up.
nice.
I'm going to Germany next month to the Hof Film Festival
Mhm.
to show the film. It's super exciting, and it's really interesting going to these festivals and seeing. I mean, on our last question, the thing that I'm finding interesting is that Jim seems to have, I think when you have a really long career like he has, you have somehow many different careers, different stages to it, and he's had this lovely sort of new audience come to him, this younger audience, ever since he got his Oscar for Call Me by Your Name, and they show up, and so you get these festival audiences where half of them are old Merchant Ivory fans, who are just dying to see the next right, who know his back catalogue and love his films and have just been waiting for another one to come out. And then you have this young audience who all really want to meet the guy who wrote Call Me by Your Name. And they you know, it brings a beautiful atmosphere into the cinema. You get the young and the older elders all mixed together and very kind of dynamized by it. So that's where we're at with the Cool Climate. It's about a year now that it's been on the festival circuit. The premiere was at the New York Film Festival last year.
I was watching some of that dialogue before I joined you. Like,
yeah, and so it's been a really nice run, and we're gonna well, we'll see. There'll be more. I know that there are more festivals that haven't been announced yet, so it keeps coming. It keeps doing its rounds. On a personal level, I'm working editing projects, but I'm also developing a couple of documentary ideas. Both of them are looking at. I went through the period where we moved from shooting on film to the digital world. A lot of that happened during the Merchant Ivory films, when I was working on the Merchant Ivory film. So, you know, when you see the editing room in A Cooler Climate, that's where we cut all the films, and it's all, you know, heavy old pieces of machinery, and we were a team, and I loved that period. I really enjoyed working on celluloid. I think anyone who was working back then kind of hankers for it and still has a soft spot for it. I feel like on some levels the 16 millimeter in A Cooler Climate was also a really big pull for me to make something with that, and to go between. I shot digitally, you know, the modern day footage of Ivory is all shot digitally.
yeah.
But going back and forth between the two was something that really appealed to me. So getting back to your question, the projects that I'm planning on working on, I'm intending on shooting on 16 millimeter,
Okay.
yeah, and getting my hands dirty again with film.
That's great. That's good. This has been such a pleasure. The film is A Cooler Climate. It's an extraordinary documentary. Giles Gardner is the co-director. Thank you so much for sharing this with our audience, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us from Paris. We really
Have a great festival. Thank you very much, Jim. Thanks.
thank you so very much.
Thanks.